Hi, thank you everyone for already starting out in the chat, sharing a bit about your background and where you're joining us from. It's very nice to have you all here. My name is Dora and I'm joining you from Budapest, from Hungary. And you can also see here Sebastian, who is the other organizer of Share. And I know that many of you have been with us in many occasions and in many events, but I'll just say a few words for those who may be joining us for the first time. Kesher means connection in Hebrew, and this is an initiative that we started just in the beginning of the pandemic, and our aim is to share in these online sessions about Jewish history, Jewish heritage, culture, and also the present day Jewish life around the world. So we visit virtually different cities and different countries, and we learn about their Jewish heritage. So thank you all for topic and for being here with us today. In today's talk, we're going to learn about the Jews of Bessarabia, which is today's Moldova, and we'll also focus on the capital, which is Kishinev. And we are very happy to welcome Evgenia Kempinski, who is our tour guide today. She's originally from St. Petersburg. She's a tour guide in basically most of the former Soviet Union and in many other areas in Europe. Currently, she's based in Barcelona. So those of you who want to visit her on a real life tour, that's where you can find her these days. But she's an expert on all these, especially Eastern European places and much, much more. So we're always so happy to learn from Evgenia. If there are any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll be happy to open up for Q&A after the presentation. And I'll pass the word to Evgenia.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dora, for this wonderful introduction. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good evening to me. I'm live from Barcelona. It's 9 in the evening here. And thank you very much that you found a moment to spend this time with Kesher. And let me speak about Moldova, former Bessarabia. And as a tour guide, I used to lead Jewish heritage tours there. Now once I live in Barcelona, I'm more concentrated on Catalonia and surrounding areas. With the Moldova, my family story is that my personal roots are in Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, and a little bit in Romania. And then my parents, it happened to be that my parents spent their honeymoon in Moldova, and then I first visited when I was very young, when I was about 20 years. That was 27 years ago. And then I loved the place and I loved the country. And as part of my studies, my interest towards the Jewish education and Jewish history, I started going there, learning more and more about it. So today our plan is to look at the history of Jews in Moldova, or you can say Bessarabia, because historically, at the time when Jews lived there, the territory was called Bessarabia. We're gonna sort out this whole story with the change of names, and unfortunately, in this part of the world, the borders changed quite a number of times. So what used to be part of Bessarabia today might not necessarily be part of it. Now, if we look at the map, so here on the left, see this is Moldova. It borders Romania on the west, Ukraine on the east and south. So this is the territory of modern day Moldova. What was called as Bessarabia by our ancestors, is they happened to be from this area, was a little bit bigger. It had another extra piece up in the north, and that's where Khotin is. And today it belongs to Ukraine. It was given to Ukraine back in the Soviet times. Also, historically, Bessarabia had access to Black Sea. Again, this territory, which is kind of a bright pink color, belongs to Ukraine as well. So you see Moldova in the course of the 20th century became smaller. Also, another cut is this green territory on the right. It's Transnistria. It's semi-independent territory. It's unrecognized independent state. One of the very difficult places to visit, a territory with a conflicting legal status. So modern day Moldova is smaller than its historical territory. Moldova is a very traditional agricultural country. Their main products are agricultural products. Moldova, on the territory of former Soviet Union, was known for its wine. You wouldn't find Moldova wine on the international market that much, but locally they produce it and they sell it. Moldova, when we speak about food, it's very much based on use of so many vegetables. You find here zucchinis, you find tomatoes, you find bell peppers, you find all those types of vegetables available because the climate is quite positive for agriculture. Moldova, it's a beautiful country. You know, it has everything. It has a bit of mountains, it has woods and rivers and lakes, and it's really nice. It's very, very pretty. It's not being visited by international tourists that much, simply because it's quite poor. It's not very well known in the international tourist market. It doesn't have great attractions, but there are some old churches and monasteries, some beautiful mountains, some woods. It's actually a nice place for retreats, like for one who wants to do hiking away from the Western civilization, but still be somewhere near Europe, then Moldova would be very, very nice. And still, even in the 21st century, Moldova preserves being quite agricultural country. And economically, unfortunately, it's not doing very well. And so the number of people is declining. People from Moldova tend to immigrate. They go, for example, to the neighboring Romania. So it's for Moldova, there is a still path ahead of the country to find its place in the modern world. Today, modern day Moldova is home to about 2.5 million people, and among them, there are still about 3,000 Jews, which is a very small number compared to what it used to be. So as I mentioned, modern day Moldova occupies most of what has been known as Bessarabia. See, on this map, it's this creamy color, sees Bessarabia here. As we spoke, northern part of it with Khotin and the southern part of it with Ismail was cut from Bessarabia in the Soviet times. And historically, it was located on the crossroads between Asia and South Europe. They were all different people that invaded this area. They were Greeks coming here, then Romans, then Bulgars, and then it was even part of Mongol Empire. So it has its own long and complicated history. There was this independent Moldovan state that was finally formed in the 14th century, and it was ruled originally by the very well known and famous person in Moldova history. His name is Stefan the Great, but then it fell under the Ottoman rule. So when we see Ottoman rule, we understand that there could be the wave of Sephardic Jews coming here from the territory from the rest of the territory of Ottoman Empire. So again, the history of Jewish community here can be traced back to the Roman times. We understand that wherever Roman troops marched, any territory they marched to, we could find some traces of Jewish life there. For example, there is some description in the historical archives. There is some description of a Jewish settlements along the river Dniester, And so there were also some colonies that belonged to Genova, and they were also inhabited by Jews. But we could never build the straight line from the ancient times to the modern days in terms of the Jewish presence. The first documentary that mentions the presence of Jews, and not just the temporary, but the residence of Jews on the territory of Moldova, dates back to the late 14th century. It was this king, Stephen the Great, that issued a special document that gave Jews right to live in all regions of Moldova and provided Jewish community with certain benefits, meaning autonomy and pieces of land to build their synagogues and houses and organize cemeteries, and the right to execute different professions. And originally, it was Sephardic Jewish community. But later, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, there were waves of Ashkenazi Jews coming here from some from Germany, from Western Europe, some from Poland, running away from the pogroms, from the Cossack pogroms of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. So even though there was another wave of Sephardic Jews in the 18th century, finally we see that in the course of time, the culture of Bessarabia and Moldova Jews finally turned out to be rather Ashkenazi culture, and we do not find that many traces of Sephardic Jews here on this land. In the 19th century, the territory of Moldova became part of Russian Empire. By that time, there were about 50,000 Jews living in Moldova. And according to the laws of Moldova, Jews were allowed to own and cultivate land. We know that in most of the countries, historically, Jews were limited in their agricultural activities, and very often Jews were forced to live in towns, not allowed to settle anywhere and use the farmland. Here in Moldova, it was opposite. There were many Jewish farmers who faced difficult times because Russian laws were exactly opposite, and Russian law did not let Jews own and cultivate land. So out of a sudden, Moldova Jews not going anywhere became subject to a different legislation, and many of them were forced to leave their houses and their farms and move into the towns, which impoverished Moldova Jews because they lost their traditional source of income. Later on, Moldova changed hands more times. In the interwar period between the First and the Second World War, Moldova belonged to Romania. Then it was occupied by the Soviet army, and that's the moment when Stalin cut those two pieces from the original Moldova territory. And then post-war, it's Soviet Moldova, and since 1991, it's finally again independent Republic of Moldova. In Russia, in the 19th century, Moldova became part of what was called the Pale of Settlement. We find it here on this map down below. See, southwest. This whole yellow territory, it is the Pale of Settlement, the territory of Russian Empire where Jews were allowed to settle wherever they wanted and move freely among all the towns and cities in this territory. So if you're born in Kovno and by chance you wanted to come in and live somewhere in Podolia, no problem. You go in and settle in Podolia. But Jews in Russian Empire were not allowed to cross this eastern border. The border It was invisible border. It did not exist in reality. It existed on papers only, but they were not allowed to go into the interior provinces of Russia. This way, Russian government wanted to preserve Russian people from the bad Jewish influence. So Moldova Jews became part of the system, and Moldova, those days it was called Bessarabia, was included into this pale of settlement. Traditionally, in Bessarabia, in Moldova, Jews played their classical role being middlemen, organizing international trade with Poland, with Hungary, Jews using their connections with other Jewish communities in other countries were always able to organize import and export operations. So in Eastern Europe, here, Jews were very much in charge of exporting goods that were locally produced and also importing all of the Western goods, and together with goods, modern Western technologies, and sometimes even modern Western ideas. The territory of Bessarabia can be divided into certain sub-regions, and here we see the main centers of Jewish settlements in Bessarabia. At the end of the 19th century, we see that the biggest number of Jews lived in Chisinau area. Chisinau, it's the capital of Bessarabia then, and the capital of Moldova today. Another very Jewish region was Horton. We're not visiting it today because today it's not part of Moldova. It's part of South Ukraine. By the end of the 19th century, we had here more than 230,000 Jews. It's about 12% of the total territory population and absolute majority of the towns and cities population. Altogether, Jews lived in more than 200 different smaller towns, bigger cities, and in many villages. Let us begin in the northeast in Soroki. Soroki, here Jewish community was first mentioned by a Swedish traveler back in 17th century. Soroki, it's an interesting town. It's the oldest settlement on the territory of Moldova. Its history is about 2,000 years. Again, there were Greeks, Romans, Italians, Turks. Everybody had something to do here because Soroki is located exactly on the river. So that's why it was such very important settlement. And this is the old photograph of the beautiful and famous synagogue of Soroki. See, it was built in the 18th century in this very fashionable style with lots of decorative elements, decorated with two lions and the Star of David. We understand the Jewish community was proud of its construction and had enough money to support such expensive project. We see that they were the oldest Jewish tombstones that are available in Soroki date back to the 16th century. And so we understand that it's about time when Jews properly settled in this area. Originally, by the time this synagogue was built, they were no more than 12 or 15 Jewish families, but they were well-to-do. They were doing well. They were wealthy. They controlled business operations in the city, so they were able to afford such construction. Here in Moldova, by the old laws, Jews were allowed to settle in every town, in any town they wanted, but in a certain quarter, in a certain part of the town. There were no ghettos, there were no gates, as those those parts of the town were not organized in the medieval style, so there were no gates to close it at night. But the government, the local government simply gave Jews certain part of the town so they could settle there and build their synagogues and organize their life. What we have here, this unusual, see, historical photographs, you never, when you start searching for the photographs of the particular place, you never know what you can find. This photography, it's such a thing. When people photographed something, they never thought probably that in about 150 years, somebody would be looking at these photographs and trying to understand something looking at them. So this is quite rare. See, these are some members of Saroki Jewish community photographed inside the synagogue. See, Beit Knesset Agadol. See, big synagogue inside this very synagogue. After the flood, there was a flood in Saroki, and this is why this is the chair for circumcision. See and that's why this chair is hung up on the ceiling so it would be preserved during the flood. That's how they preserved this very precious item. So it's a very, very unusual moment photographed here that we can witness a little piece of life that disappeared long ago. These are some more of the panoramic views of Saroki. That's the old fort here. And this building you see here, that's exactly the synagogue that we just saw. Saroki, on one hand, it's a town. On the other hand, and the outskirts of it look like a village. So they were Jews living in the center of it, but they were also Jews living in the outskirts because they were involved in the agricultural activities. But by the late 19th century, there were about 9,000 Jews. And unlike those original Jews who were wealthy, by the end of the 19th century, majority of Saroki Jews were very poor. The problem is our ancestors, the life and the pale of settlement, was that in the course of time, because government limited the territory that was allowed to Jews, the towns got over and over populated. And so people were becoming poorer and poorer because there was no room to expand your business, to expand your activity. That's how absolute majority of the Jews in the Pale of Settlement finally lived very, very poor. When we look at the old panoramic view of Saroki, we see that there was pretty green. There were over 1,000 private homes in the city. There was a church, there was a synagogue, there were 3 batei midrash. There was some ruins of this old castle, and all different commercial establishments were owned by Jews. There were pharmacies, printing house, warehouses, pubs and taverns, mills, brick factories, soap factories, oil mill, cheese factory. All of that was operated by Jews. There are 2 interesting things that I would like to pay specific attention to. 2 specific things. One about relations between Jews and Gentiles in Moldova. And that's why I'm showing you something which is absolutely non-Jewish. This is the process of baptizing a newborn baby in Orthodox Church in Moldova. And why do I show it to you right now? In Moldova, historically, there was a very strong tradition to invite Jews to participate in the ceremony of baptizing a newborn Christian child. Local Gentiles strongly believed it would give this child a good fortune. this tradition is being preserved in so many local stories. And when the scholars, the modern scholars, ethnographers interview some of the older Gentiles living in the villages in Moldova, they all recall this tradition. Another interesting tradition that is typical for Bessarabia, Moldova Jews is to combine two things that we don't usually combine together. On the left, this is vodka, a very strong alcohol. Normally, if you want to drink vodka, you drink it with something salty or a bit spicy, like you take pickle or herring, or at least dark bread. But Bessarabia, Moldova Jews used to drink it with sweets. On the right, that's rugelach, one of the traditional Ashkenazi sweet pastry from Eastern Europe. This is specifically Bessarabian Jewish thing to drink vodka with something sweet. Another town, which is Rashkov, today it's located on that territory of Transnistria. And look at this beautiful synagogue. Today, there are only some walls of it exist. It was ruined first during the Second World War and then during the Soviet period. So only two walls survived with this gorgeous image of menorah on one of them. So historically, Rashkov was part of Moldova, but Rashkov Jews were mainly Jews from Ukraine. So many Jews of Rashkov, they had close relatives in the neighboring territories that are modern day Ukraine. On this old photograph, we can clearly see the synagogue. It's much taller than surrounding buildings. Rashkov is famous for its Hasidic dynasty. See the southern part of the Pale of Settlement, poor part of the Pale, not very educated part of the Pale. I mean, Bessarabian Jews were not known for being Talmudic scholars, not like Lithuanian Jews. So this territory fell under the influence of the Hasidic movement easily and became the cornerstone of Hasidic movement. So we have quite a number of the very well-known Hasidic leaders from this territory, from Bessarabia, from nearby Romania, from nearby Ukraine. So here there was this Rashkover Hasidic dynasty that is known up to today. By the late 19th century, there were about 3,000 Jews, so the town was much smaller. For 3,000 Jews, there were 4 synagogues. When I do the general talk about the shtetls, this interesting phenomenon of Jewish life in Eastern Europe, I explain why in even the smallest town, you always have several synagogues. You have one main synagogue, several batei midrash. It's always the same. You won't find even the smallest town with just one synagogue. It's impossible. And again, here in Rashkov, whatever business existed belongs to Jews, whether it be a pharmacy or tannery or different warehouses, mill, inn, tea shop, other grocery shops, and whatever was on sale, it was organized by Jews. Today, Rashkov, as much as it's difficult to get there, it's one of the places where the Hasidic Jews tend to come because there is a grave of one of the leaders of the early Hasidic movement. So from time to time, locals can still see Jews again after a long break. Benderi. So Benderi, we go down to the south, and again, it's southeast of Moldova, and it's also the town which is located on the territory of this unrecognized Pridnestrovia or Transnistria Republic. See, Benderi, we have this old map. This was the fort and the town near the fort. Very classical story of the construction of the medieval town. Jews first settled in Benderi back in the 18th century. Originally, they were about 100 Jewish families that came to live here, and by the end of the 19th century, they were more than 10,000 Jews. What we see on the photographs, this long street, it's actually a market square. All the houses that face Market Square belonged to Jews, and the wealthiest Jews of Benderi had their houses here around the Market Square. That was the most prestigious, the best, and the most expensive place to have your home. Also, you have here the very typical architecture of the Pale of Settlement, the house that has entrance from the corner. That was very typical I'd style of the house. Jews build their houses this way because on the ground floor you have some business. Maybe you have a cafeteria or a shop or a workshop. So you want it to be visible from both streets, and you want people walking down both streets to be able to enter it. Benderi was quite a prosperous city because it had a railway station. So Jews in Benderi were able to make better money and were better set than in some of the other towns. In the late 19th century, of course, the railroad changed the economical situation of the region dramatically. On the right photograph, this as the former community hospital. So in every town, Jews, as if Jewish community was able to, it funded several communal institutions, including schools and hospitals, of course. Schools, hospitals, the old age home, sometimes could be just Talmud Torah, religious school for boys, or also secondary school, or also school, professional school, or professional school for girls. So the wealthier the community, the more educational institutions it can afford. There is another photograph of the market square. We shall never be surprised to see the church on the market square of the town, which is mainly populated by Jews, because no matter how many Jews live there, Christianity was still the official religion, and the best place in town had to be given to the church, of course. This is a very interesting map, handwritten map of Binderi that was hand copied from the older map by a Jew originally from Benderi. And we see that it's very typical for those towns of the Pale of Settlement. They had no room to grow because they were surrounded with farmland. So there were no parks, there were no public squares. They were just lines of streets and many, many, many homes and the market square, and that's it. And again, as we see here, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 synagogues. And they could be old synagogue, new one. The rabbi's synagogue means there was some important Hasidic leader who had his own synagogue. Butchers' synagogue. See, butchers were well-to-do men, respectful with some money, so they very often that they had their own synagogue. And the number of synagogues was only growing. What we have on another photograph, this is the photograph of Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah, it's the equivalent of Heder. Heder, it's the private school for Jewish boys, private religious school for Jewish boys. parents had to pay to the melamed, they had to pay to the teacher. The boys of the poor families whose parents were not um, were not able to pay for their tuition, and also orphans. They were put together by the community and sent to the Talmud Torah. It's the religious school for boys, but fully sponsored by the community. So here we have these poor boys, everything they have is given to them by the community. We have the teacher and the sponsor, the curator, the wealthiest man of Benderi, who sponsors the education to the poor children. It's a great mitzvah. It's a very important good deed. In the 19th century, Russian government, Russian czars experimented a lot, trying to figure out what to do with Jews. Nicholas I, his experiments were among the worst. First of all, in 1827, he decided that Jews from now on had to serve in the Russian army, which Jews absolutely did not want to. And then in 1835, he issued a decree to allow Jews to receive state-owned land for indefinite use. So they could acquire and lease it, and then organize agricultural communities. The idea was to make Jews productive. Lots of Jewish agricultural colonies were organized here in the south on the territory of Bessarabia. Jews from all over the Pale of Settlement, including Lithuania and Latvia and Belarus, came here to start those colonies, to do farming. And they became very, very successful, even though they had to start from the scratch. They had nothing, zero, absolutely. But they became very successful. They produced wheat, corn, sunflower oil, soybeans, kosher oil. But of course, the most important and the most successful and profitable was the cultivation of tobacco. So very soon we see that there were thousands of Jews involved in the agriculture. As soon as the project became successful, Russian government decided to limit it and then fully close it. So you spend years building your house, cultivating land, organizing everything, and out of a sudden, boom, and you are not allowed to do it anymore. You have to leave it and go back to nobody knows where, because I mean your house back in the shtetl probably does not exist anymore. So what happened here in Bessarabia, most Jews continued living in those farms, using them, working there, but under the fake names, under the names of some Russian owner. This is how terrible the policy of Russian government was towards Jews. And this is only one of the elements that brought Jews to the tremendous poverty that we see looking at the photographs of the late 19th, early 20th century. Chisinau, the capital of Moldova. In modern days, absolute majority of Moldova Jews live, of course, in its capital. Very little of historical Chisinau survived. It was very much rebuilt in the Soviet times, so there are some typical Soviet constructions, but some parts of it, certain old buildings and old streets still survived. We still see some of this old beauty. Chisinau can be divided into two parts. The upper town, this regular city with straight streets and squares and monuments, and lower town with curved old medieval streets. Majority of Chisinau Jews lived, of course, in this old town. By the late 19th century, there were about 50,000 Jews in Chisinau, making a bit more than half of the city's population. That was pretty unique. That's a lot for a big city. It's not a small town. It's the capital of those days giant province of Russia. These are the photographs of the upper town. See the wider streets. Some even had tram lines, some nicer streets. There were some Jews living there, some of the successful and educated and the emancipated Jews, enjoying the nice streets and clean air with the trees and parks. But majority of Kishinev Jews lived in the lower town, in the very small homes built one above another, with the streets that if you don't know the place, you never find your way around. This is the life of Kishinev Jews. You live in the capital, but it feels like life in the shtetl. You know all your neighbors, you know where to get something to eat. You spend much time outdoors as a child, and you live at the edge of the poverty. And it's true that Bessarabian Jews, out of all Jews of Russian Empire, were considered among the poorest and also the least educated. They had to work hard. They had to work hard to make money, so they never had time to devote themselves to the Talmudic studies. And here we have some of the photographs of Kishinev Jews. By the way they're dressed, you can clearly say they have very, very little money. This is one of the small markets in that lower part of Kishinev. That's a wonderful photograph with this man looking at the lower Kishinev from the hill. The water carrier, this water carrier is well-to-do man because he has a horse and a cart. Most of the water carriers did not have it. They had to carry water on their back. Again, you see some man fixing something, another one cleaning shoes, and more and someone selling the old clothes, and more and more and more. And this man selling bagels. We understand that he will make a couple coins, and that's it. And the husband with wife fixing shoes. Look at the shoes that they have to fix. They're all old, so again, they will be paid very, very, very little. See, this is the more of a traditional water carrier, barefoot because he has no money to buy shoes, carrying water on his back, and the traditional costume of Bessarabian Jews, most traditional type of Bessarabian Jewish type. Jews owned much of business. So they were poor Jews and they were wealthy Jews. And poor Jews lived in this lower town and wealthy Jews lived in the upper town. And among wealthy Jews, they were owners of 29 different factories, the steam mills, of tobacco factories. What's important is that all those enterprises, if they belonged to Jews, they hired Jews. So if it's the Jewish factory, then all of the workers would also be Jewish. Most of the Jews of Kishinev were involved in small trade and in peddling, in selling different agricultural products. This is beautiful choral synagogue built in the nice neighborhood of the town of the city by the wealthy Jews, by the wealthiest part of the Jewish community. It's called choral synagogue. It was modeled after the synagogue in St. Petersburg. Its choral means the service is accompanied with the choir. So it's the synagogue built to represent the community. Now we come to prior to the Holocaust, this was the most terrible event that took place in Kishinev. And it started with the article in a local newspaper, which is called Bessarabets, the article which was published by this man. His name is Khrushchevan. It says professional Jew hater. It's true. the leader of the extreme reactionary party. It's true. He was professional Jew hater. And he published an article with the most traditional blood libel, saying that there was a body of a boy, a 13-year-old boy, found in a cave, with uh, some evidence that he was tortured before he died. And of course, it was exactly the time of the Easter, and the Passover, so Jews needed to kill him to take his blood, bake matzah. So the next day after this article was published, the bloodiest pogrom broke out in Kishinev. It took 2 days. And so this pogrom, it was not the most violent in Russian Empire. By that time, there was already a history of Jewish pogroms in Russian Empire that started in 1881. But it was incredibly cruel, and it was organized by neighbors. It was just neighbors. They knew their victims by name. They broke into the houses of the people that they knew by name, that just yesterday they said hello to each other, that just yesterday they bought something from them. These are some photographs of the victims we see the devastated homes, we see wounded Jews. We see the hospital with wounded Jews. Some 800 people got arrested. Some 300 were put on trial and were sentenced to various terms of hard labor or imprisonment. Even the governor was dismissed from his position. So even the state authorities were devastated by what happened in Kishinev. 49 Jews were killed, at least 600 Jewish women were raped, hundreds of Jews were injured, over 1,500 Jewish homes were destroyed. And it could have stayed as just one of many other acts of anti-Jewish violence. Because they were many. Because in Russia, prior to the revolution, there were two terrible waves of anti-Jewish pogroms. One in 1881, another one in 1905. So there was nothing surprising about that. But it just happened to be that there was this man, Jacob Bernstein Cohen. He was a doctor and a devoted Zionist and a member of the early Zionist local Zionist organization Hovevei Zion, and a very good man. He witnessed the pogrom in his hometown in Kishinev, and he decided that the world needs to know about it. He started sending telegrams to the media around the world and to the Jewish communities in the West, to the Jewish community in England, to the Jewish communities in the United States. He together with his friends organized a special committee to assist the victims of the pogrom. They managed to fundraise and put together over 1 million rubles. That was a big amount of money those days. So the articles explaining the pogrom in Kishinev were published in Yiddish daily news in New York and then reprinted by the New York Times on April 24th, 1903, stating that they received a report smuggled out of Russia, stating that the anti-Jewish riots in Kishinev are worse than the censor will permit to publish. This man, Jacob Bernstein Cohen, he made the story of Kishinev Jews known so that we remember it. There are so many other pogroms that we never speak about, this pogrom we remember. Even today, if you go on Google and you make the search, Kishinev Jews, most of the pages you will see will be dedicated to this pogrom. It became so well known that a man, non-Jewish, the man you have on your screen, Michael David, he's Irish from Great Britain. He was a socialist. He always hated Jews. He thought Jews were wealthy capitalists, terrible people. He read the articles about the pogrom in Kishinev, and he decided to go and see with his own eyes. He came to Kishinev, and what he saw devastated him, impressed him more than anything in his life. He went home and wrote the book Within the Pale, the true story of anti-Semitic persecution in Russia. This man who hated Jews turned upside down, seeing the reality. It was like eye-opening for him that in reality, Jews are not what he thought of them. It's a very rare case that a non-Jew published a book about anti-Jewish persecution in Russia. You don't find it anywhere else. Now back to Jews. At that time, Chaim Nachman Bialik, who we all know, and if like in Israel, for example, see, before we came to Barcelona, we used to live in Israel for many years. My daughter went to school in Israel. When you send your child to Israeli school, first year, one of the personalities they learn about Ben Gurion, and they learn about Chaim Nachman Bialik. In Hebrew culture, he's poet number one, incredibly important for us. Chaim Nachman Bialik in 1903 was a very young journalist in Odessa. And so he was sent as a journalist, he was sent to Kishinev to do his own investigation, to understand what had happened there and come back with the article. He came back not only with the article for the newspaper, but with the poem. In English, it's called In the City of Slaughter. It's one of the most difficult texts to read. Very difficult. In this text, Chaim Nachman Bialik expressed the idea that nobody before was willing to speak about. He spoke about Jewish women. He spoke about Jewish women falling victims of this anti-Jewish pogroms, because Jewish women get raped brutally, terribly. He spoke about Jewish women being raped in their own homes, and their husbands and fathers and brothers hiding behind the doors and behind the shelves and behind the piece of furniture, witnessing it. It's the subject you never speak about. We know from the document, there are documents that shows us, for example, that after the pogrom, they were husbands going to the rabbis, asking if they could get a divorce because their wife was raped, and so they don't consider her good enough anymore. And it's it's such a sensitive subject that up to the end of the 20th century, nobody ever wanted to touch. But Chaim Nachman Bialik had enough courage to speak about it. If you have enough courage, read his poem, but prepare, be strong, because it's very, very painful reading. And the story never ends, unfortunately. This is a very well-known caricature. It was published in the United States. It shows U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt talking to the Russian Tsar Nicholas II, demanding that he stops the oppression of the Jews. Again, this is the result of the fact that the Kishinev pogrom became known. This is what one man can do, making the world know, making the world listen and see. This is even the letter that Theodor Herzl sent to the Jewish community of Kishinev, saying that the entire world was horrified by what was happened in Kishinev. Of course, as a true Zionist, he asks ad matai, until when? Until when uh, we can we can live with this reality. In the modern days, there is a monument that was put up in 1993, the monument to the victims of that Kishinev pogrom in one of the parks of modern day Kishinev. Another very interesting consequence is that when the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People was established in the United States in 1909, they were Jewish immigrants from Kishinev actively participating in it, saying that we know what it feels to be oppressed, and so we don't want others to feel it. So Jewish immigrants from Kishinev became incredibly active in all different movements for the social justice. There's a wonderful book that I recommend you to read by Stephen Zipperstein, Pogrom, Kishinev, and the Tilt of History. It's the book explaining the consequences of the pogrom, the influence of this pogrom on the Jewish history, on the Jewish life in the modern days. Very, very, very interesting reading. Highly recommended. First World War devastated Jewish communities in Russia. The rise of anti-Semitism and the Semitic pogroms organized by the Cossacks, by the Russian army, and the Russian government started resettling Jews. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were moved, were expelled from their homes and sent into the interior regions of Russia, thinking that they were not loyal enough to the government. So they were pogroms organized by the local criminal groups. All the losses, the problems that Russia faced during the First World War, of course, Jews were blamed. So, of course, I mean, who is in charge that Russia is losing the war? Of course, Jews are in charge. What we have here on the photograph, we have the refugees, the Jewish refugees in a temporary shelter in Kishinev. It's time the First World War when American Jews started actively helping Russian Jews. It's the time when Joint was organized, and it was time when American Jews started sending money and food and clothes and sanitary products and medical help to support Russian Jews who were losing everything. And we had so many kids that became orphans. We just tremendous Jewish poverty then. And then in the interwar period, after the First World War, after the revolution in Russia, Russia became Soviet Union, and Bessarabia became part of Greater Romania. By that time, in all of Romania, there were about 800,000 Jews. Among them, they were about 250,000 Jews in Bessarabia. So the situation in the interwar Romania was that Romania, on one hand, wanted its own territory to become bigger, to get back all of its original lands. On the other hand, it did not like Jews. It wanted to get rid of Jews. But instead, it received these lands richly populated with Jews. It received Bessarabia, which was full of tremendously poor Jews. And interwar Romania was one of the worst places for Jews in Europe, one of the most difficult and one of the worst. Even though officially the equality was formally introduced. But Jews were limited in every single point. They were not allowed to enter the civil services. They were not allowed to get into the university. They were not allowed to occupy positions in the army or judicial positions. There was rapid and terrible growth of anti-Semitism, and the Great Economical Depression only made it worse. See, when we look at this map, there's big territory of Romania, the central part of it, that was almost free of Jews. There were very few Jews there. And majority of Jews were concentrated on the edges of it, especially in Bessarabia. It was the most tense Jewish populated area in the interwar Romania. Let us look at Balti, the town Balti here in the northwest of modern-day Moldova. By the late 19th century, again, about 10,000 Jews. And again, as everywhere else, Jews were in charge of different businesses. Here, Balti held the most important horse and cattle fair in all of Bessarabia, which provided income to the whole town. There were flour mills and factories, and of course, taverns and inns. The oil that was produced here was exported to Western Europe and even overseas, thanks to the Jews. So Jews were economically very, very active here in Balti. On one hand, interwar period, it's the time of very tense, it's tense time, it's time of growing anti-Semitism. On the other hand, it's time of the vibrant and very active Jewish life when some Jews become Zionists, others socialists, other vote for the ideas of acculturations. Others want to continue being traditional and orthodox and go deep into the religion. It's a very interesting mix when you have newspapers published in Yiddish and Romanian and Hebrew, new schools are being opened. Um, it's an incredibly active period of Jewish life here, not only in Balti, but you see it everywhere in Eastern Europe. This is former main street of Balti, and you clearly see the Jewish boys walking up the street. It's St. Petersburg Street. See more of the. We understand that parts of the city looked very nice. Others looked a bit more like a small town with the little courtyards in front of the houses, with only small part of the street to be paved. And again, these are all the people you see on the photograph. They're all Jews. And the outskirts of the town, where it's very, very difficult to move your cart. Even two horses can't move it, so you have to push it because it just gets very, very dirty after every single rain. And more of the cleaner part of the city. So again, it's time when, for example, they were also Ukrainian Jews coming to Balti, fleeing the terrible pogroms in Ukraine after the First World War. Um, so Balti became this amazing cultural Jewish center with modernized schools, with magazines, newspapers, libraries, concerts, orchestras, theaters, sport clubs. Life was, as much as it was difficult, as much as the economy was doing really bad, but culturally it was incredibly rich life. There's some photograph of the Zionist youth organization in Baltim. Um, they published newspapers and they had orchestras and they were doing sports. It was not dying. It was life with expectation to live better, expectation to for the situation to settle down, and expectation for life to become better and better. There was some Jewish bank and the oil factory that belonged to the Jewish family. Okay, in July 1940, Moldova was occupied by the Soviet army. See the Soviet coat of arms here. And then in half a year, the the process of turning Moldova into the Soviet Republic began. So every national organization, every religious organization had to be closed, every private enterprise had to be closed. And so anyone identified as a Zionist or an entrepreneur or a member of a capital or capitalist, they got arrested, put on the trains, and sent to Siberia. About, if we look at Balti specifically, about 2,000 people in total were exiled to Siberia. At that period, absolute majority of them were Jews. And as much as it sounds terrible, for Balti Jews, it became life savior because majority of those Jews who were expelled, so who were sent to Siberia, survived, while Jews who stayed fell under um, uh, fell under the horror of Holocaust very soon. These are the photographs of Balti, already ruined and photographed after the German invasion of the town. The territory of Moldova became part of went under Romanian administration, and so-called Transnistria Governorate was formed. It's here, see, this is Moldova here, and Transnistria was this part of southwest of Ukraine. The capital of Transnistria was in Odessa. And the Jews of Romania were to be deported to Transnistria to be finally murdered there. These are some photographs of destroyed Chisinau, the capital of Moldova. In Chisinau, the ghetto was organized. It was a giant part of the town with 2 gates, 80 soldiers. The only good thing that I can tell you about Moldova during the Second World War and the Holocaust is that Romanian government was highly corrupted, which means they were better options to bribe somebody and find your way out. So that was the only good thing that I can tell you. Another good thing would only concern Romanian Jews, because Romania did not murder its own Jews, but Jews in Bessarabia were to be all murdered. The Romanian government had no place for them. Because of the general disorder in Romania during the war and the general disorder and corruption in Romanian government, the percentage of Jews who survived on Romanian occupied territory is higher than the percentage of Jews who survived on German occupied territory. After the Second World War, but in general, majority of Jews were murdered. After the war, when we look at the numbers, we see 43,000 Jews in Chisinau. So many Chisinau Jews survived the war, some of them in evacuation, some of them in the army, and they came back, they returned to Chisinau. After the Second World War, Jews returned to the smaller towns of Moldova, re-established their life already in the Soviet reality. So in the post-war period, the Jewish population of Chisinau was even growing and reached those 50,000 Again, some of them were original Kishinev Jews, others were Jews from other parts of Soviet Union. If we come to Kishinev today, we shall get to see the Central Park. Historically, it was the territory of the Jewish cemetery. Today, part of the Jewish cemetery survived. Part of it is occupied by the park, but part of it is still available with the old Jewish tombstones. Some tombstones of the Jewish cemetery were used on the construction of the city, so we find them in some walls and roads everywhere in Kishinev. Out of many pre-war synagogues, only few survived. For example, the synagogue of glaziers and bookbinders, which dates back to the late 19th century. It survived, and today it functions as a synagogue. So today, even though there's a very small number of Jews living there, but the Jewish life keeps going on in Kishinev. These are the modern photographs of some of those old Kishinev streets. The streets that prior to the Second World War were full of Yiddish. Streets that were absolutely full of Yiddish, of Jews living here, working, studying. This was the Jewish world of Kishinev. Even though there is a small number of Jews in Moldova, Moldova Jews are very active in organizing different Jewish cultural activities. There is this Kishinev Jacobs Jewish campus. There is Jewish museum in Kishinev. There are Jewish conferences being organized in Kishinev. There is Jewish Cultural Center Kedem that organizes different classes and celebrations. It's beautiful Jewish cultural organization. This building on the right, it's the same that you have on the left. It's the Haystack Synagogue. That's the way it looks today. That's the way it looked like 100 years ago. It belongs to Agudat Israel, another Jewish organization that is connected to Israel. It's Kishinev Central Synagogue. And so again, it's active, it's open whenever. If you happen to be in Kishinev, you're welcome to come and join the service. As you see, it's Orthodox and it provides all necessary services for Jews. This is the these are the ruins of another Kishinev synagogue. I don't think it will ever be rebuilt. It will probably be demolished one day. There are few former synagogue buildings, but nobody has money to restore them, and nobody has an idea how to use them anymore. This is the map of marking the towns with Jewish life today. So you see there are quite a few towns in Moldova, in Soroka, and Ribnica, and Benderi, and Tiraspol, Dubasari, that still have Jewish communities. Majority of the Jews living in Moldova are, of course, older Jews. Their children and grandchildren are usually in the States or in Israel. And they prefer to continue living in Moldova. They have small synagogues and small communities, and the Jewish life keeps going on. And the last thing, couple minutes, I'll occupy your attention. I would like to tell you the story of Ribnitzer Rabbi. It's a pretty impressive story. We have the stories of some incredible Hasidic rabbis, but from the old times, and this is different because it's rather modern. See, Ribnitzer Rabbi, he was born in Romania, and then not in Ribnitz, in a different place. Ribnitz is in Moldova. Ribnitz is a small Jewish town in Moldova. The rabbi turned out to be in Ribnica because he was locked in the ghetto there during the Second World War. The ghetto was organized in Ribnica. This is one of the old photographs of the market square of Ribnica. And the rabbi was locked there. And then the story becomes legendary. The legendary story says that he became friendly with the Romanian head of the ghetto so much that he was able to preserve some Jews from being murdered, and he also survived himself. And in general, helped quite a number of Ribnitsa Jews survived. This is the old Jewish cemetery of Ribnitsa. And in the post-war period, the rabbi decided not to go back to Romania, but he stayed in Ribnitsa. And what's pretty impressive is that he was devoted Orthodox Hasidic Jew. He never changed his life. Post-war Soviet Moldova, small town Ribnitsa, you have this man. He was married. He never had children, quite like his teacher, with whom he studied. Who would dress black, who would go to Dniester River to use it as mikveh, who would observe every single of the mitzvah. He would observe every single Jewish law in the eyes of, in front of the eyes of Soviet KGB. And for some reasons, KGB didn't touch him. And finally, he left Moldova and he ended up in Brooklyn in the United States. Today, Ribnitsa Jews preserve his photographs, preserve the memory of him, because he's one of those local miracles, local leaders that people tell the tales about, that people consider his personal belongings as being incredible treasures. And his story is interesting. And again, sometimes even if everything is against you, you can still do what you want and still survive. And his story is an example of that survival, even against all odds, against the harsh rules of the Soviet Union. We normally finish with food. If you happen to be in Chisinau, there is a kosher restaurant there. Unfortunately, it doesn't serve traditional Bessarabian food. It serves rather Israeli style food with schnitzel, salmon, chicken, and so on. It's very unfortunate that the traditions of Bessarabian food cannot be preserved today in Bessarabia. There are just too few Jews to preserve it. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions, of course.
Thank you so much, Evgenia, for another fascinating talk and the stories and everything that you showed to us. It was wonderful to see this unknown world. And thank you, of course, everyone to be here with us today. We want to let you know that with your contributions to Kesher, you're also donating to the Together Plan, which is a charity based mostly in Belarus, but they work a lot to preserve heritage from the former Jewish heritage from the former Soviet Union and to revive the communities. So thank you also for that. And I also want to just say that I saw a lot of comments about families and where everyone's from and the last names. So thank you also for sharing these stories. And I even saw that some people found others who are from the same town. So it was lovely to read them. So I'll read some questions that came in. The first question was, in what year did the Jews lose their lands?
Um, hmm, it's difficult to tell you the exact year. If you ask about the year when the project of organizing Jewish agricultural settlements ended, or you ask about the Jews losing land when Bessarabia became part of Russian Empire. So
Yeah,
give
I
me
think
more details.
it was the second. because the question came very early on before you spoke about the Soviet Union. So it was about
Thank you. See, Jews did not lose the land, even though the government in 1860s and 1880s, 60s and then 80s limited the Jewish use of land. Still, the Jewish agricultural colonies survived. They just started using fake names. They registered their communities under the Russian name, so to preserve their business.
Thank you. And I think a follow-up question came to this. How about the agrarian reform in 1924? What happened to the land Jews owned?
1924. It's you mean, okay, let's see this. A agrarian reform in which country? In Soviet Union or in Romania?
Yvette, you are welcome to unmute. I saw you had many comments and thoughts, so
Yeah,
if you'd like to share with your own
thank
voice.
you. Yeah, thank you. You know, my family came from Besarabia. My grandfather, they immigrated. He left Besarabia in 1927, and he immigrated to Peru in 19 to Peru. And my family went to Peru. He came by himself, and my grandmother came 5 years later with my uncles. My dad was born in Lima. For me, it was always very difficult to understand how was Jewish life. Like, he never wanted to speak about anything. So I've been spending, I would say, 30, 40 years researching, finding what happens to my family, and I discover many stories. But for me, it's very complex to understand, like, Jews own land or not. I know that they own lands because I've been there. I've been in Besarabia, in Moldova many times already. But I still don't understand many things. Like, if they own land, I read that when the reform in 1922 in Romania, which was Besarabia was Romania, which was complex because people were changing languages from speaking Russian to speaking Romanian. And when you speak, when you say that life was actually getting better for the Jews, but the Jews were leaving the country at the same time, you know. And when you read about the Yizkor books, one only sees it from the point of view of the Zionists. So it's very complex to understand how was the society at that time. So what happened with the land? Some people say the Jews had more land than before, but not. Like my family living in this tiny village outside Yedinet. So like, how was it? Because it's very difficult to understand.
Oh, thank you, Yvette. And it's, you know what? Thank you for your question. It's very complex. It's very complex. There is no one answer. On one hand, interwar period, 1920s, 1930s. Economically, life was incredibly difficult, very difficult. It's the time of the Great Depression. Romania was doing very, very bad. Economically, it was terrible. People were becoming poorer. Some of the businesses that they had before, they lost because there were no customers, because there was nobody to sell products to. The old economical ties that they had were broken, because if they had economical ties with, for example, Jews of Ukraine, now they were in two different realities. They could not continue their businesses. The laws in Romania were more and more anti-Semitic, limiting Jews, limiting Jewish activities, not letting Jews occupy modernized professions, for example. So this caused so many Jews leaving Romania. Romania did not give Jews citizenship. There were so many Jews without proper passport.
My
Nothing.
grandmother didn't have a passport. My grandfather lived with a passport because I found that in the Peruvian records. Exactly, they didn't have passports, so that was also a complicated story.
Absolutely. Romania did not grant Jews citizenship automatically, not at all. So many Jews were leaving Romania, running away from the poverty, from inability to support their families. On the other hand, interwar period, it's time when you already have so many Jews who do not want to live just traditional life, who instead of sending their children to their sons to Heder, send their kids to the state school so kids would learn Romanian and math and geography and history. You have Zionist movement, very active. You have Jewish literature. So as much as economically, life was terrible, terrible. From our standards today, it's below anything we can imagine. I was born in Soviet Union. I know what it is to live. I never lived myself in a communal flat, but I have a friend who lived in a communal flat. I know what it is to have a flat with 10 rooms, one bathroom, 10 families share it. I've seen it with my own eyes. I know what it is to have your summer home with the facilities outdoors. Where you want to go pee, you have to run into your garden and use the loo there. I know I've seen it with my own eyes, but even with this, the life in Bessarabia, in many other parts of Eastern Europe, in the interwar period, for many Jews, was terribly, terribly difficult economically. At the same times, culturally, it was flourishing, flourishing. Culture and economy are different things. Newspapers, books, music, theater, education, ideas, history, all Jewish cultural things were flourishing in Eastern Europe in the interwar period. This is the complicity
That's
of
the
the
complex.
time.
That is it is so complex to understand. And one more thing, if I may ask, is like I know that some men left by himself first, and some other left with their families. So my question was because my family was not poor. Like my grandmother came from the wealthy family, and my grandfather, they were wealthier in their village. So like I don't understand like why some men left by themselves and why some families left together. Is there a rule or something? Because it took him 5 years to bring my grandmother. So sometimes I think it's because of the passport, but like what how these women felt when they were leaving, when they were left alone in their villages, not knowing if the husbands would pick them up.
Sorry, we
Yeah.
still have a lot of questions,
Yeah.
so I'll just ask quickly Evgenia to briefly answer the question.
The general
Thank you.
answer to this, in the most cases, men were the first to go overseas and see if they can make money there, if they can settle there, and then they either sent money back so their families can join them, or came back to pick up their family, or never came back. Some of the poor families managed to send their sons away. So we have a giant number of Jewish boys that were sent overseas by themselves with some neighbors, with some distant relatives under some other's name. So there was no law, no rule. It depended on a particular family situation, very often financial.
Thank you. The next question is if how can one find recordings or music sheet for the choral synagogue tradition? If you know that there are any recordings or cantors that you can find on YouTube, or what would you suggest?
Oh, if you simply Google cantor music, you will find lots of sources. There are festivals of cantor music.
I
And
think like specifically from the Kishinev choral
then
synagogue.
you should look for the music of Bessarabian Jews. Just do your research, and you will find there are some old records and also some of the modern ones as well.
Is there any specific names that you recommend
No.
for this, or?
No specific name.
Okay, thank you. Was the Kishinev pogrom only in Kishinev, or were Jews in other places such as Nisporeni attacked?
At that very moment, 1903, it was only in Kishinev. It was Kishinev program.
Thank you. And could you explain again the baptism ceremony that you spoke about?
It's the very interesting and quite unique tradition. I don't see it in any other places. That in Moldova, in Bessarabia, Gentiles, especially in the villages, strongly believed that if you invite a couple of Jews, usually a man and a woman, a couple, to be with you, to celebrate, to eat, to drink, to celebrate with you the baptism of your newly born child. In the Orthodox Church, you bring the child to the church after the child is born to get baptized. Then this child gets better luck. They believe that Jews bring this child better luck. So it was a popular belief, and we have no idea where it came from, and but it existed for very long, up to Second World War.
Thank you so much. So we are at the end of our time. So thank you everyone for being here. As always, tomorrow we will send out follow-up information. You'll receive the recording of this talk. You'll have access to it for 3 days. And we will also share some follow-up resources, Evgenia's contact details on website, and you will also receive the books that she mentioned. So you will hear from us tomorrow in an email. And we hope you enjoyed this presentation, and we hope to see you all very soon. Our next event is on Sunday about the Jews of Balkans. It's going to be a free event where we will also let you know about some trips that our partners are organizing. So you are welcome to join us on Sunday. And thank you, Evgenia, once again for an amazing presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Always fascinating, Evgenia.
Thank you. Thank you. See you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining.